Welcome back to Baha'i On Air. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jane. Great to be exploring with you all again.
Today we're doing a deep dive into a really significant letter known as the Rosenberg Tablet.
That's right. And this is a tablet, essentially a letter from Abdu'l Bahá.
Yes. It was actually written in response to a letter someone sent back on April 6, 1906, a handmaid of God, as she's called.
And her letters touched on some, quite personal concerns.
It did. Things like the health of a certain Mrs. End, worries about her husband's spiritual condition, and also a specific question about, well, the history of philosophers. Kind of an interesting mix.
Definitely. So what we want to do today is really unpack this tablet from a Baha'i perspective.
Look at what it's saying, how it applies to maybe our own lives, and, connects to the bigger picture of Baha'i teachings in society.
Exactly. We're aiming to pull out those key insights for you, make it thorough, but also hopefully quick and clear.
Okay, let's jump in. Right at the start, there's this quite powerful statement about health. It says, a disaster to the body when spiritual health is present is of no importance. That is the main thing.
Wow, yeah. That hits hard right away.
It does. So when we talk about spiritual health in a Baha'i context, what are we really looking at?
Well, it's fundamental. It's not just feeling happy or calm, though that can be part of it. It's really about the state of our soul, our connection with God, developing virtues, love, justice, detachment, aligning our actions with God's teachings. It's seen as the core reality, much more lasting than just the physical body.
It really does shift the focus, doesn't it? Away from the purely physical, which we tend to worry so much about.
Exactly. And Abdu'l Bahá then says something quite profound about this Mrs. Asa, that she hath taken on immortal life because of this spiritual health.
Right, immortal life. How should we understand that? Is it just about life after death?
Well, yes and no. Baha'i teachings see it as starting now. It's about achieving a kind of spiritual awareness, a vitality that isn't limited by our physical existence.
So living by these principles kind of cultivates this enduring part of us.
Precisely. It's a quality of life, a spiritual reality that begins here and continues on.
Okay, that makes sense. Then the letter shifts focus a bit to the daughter named A.
Yes, it says, if her dear daughter be trained according to the instructions of God, she will grow to be a peerless plant in the garden of the heart.
Such a beautiful image. It clearly highlights how important spiritual education for children is in the faith.
Absolutely central. It's about nurturing their inherent spiritual nature, teaching virtues, helping them understand Baha'i principles right from the start.
That idea of a peerless plant, it's just so much potential, doesn't it? If nurtured correctly.
It really does. And then it touches on the father's role.
Ah, yes, saying he should choose for his daughter the glory that dieth not. But it also adds that he has freedom in how he educates her.
Right, there's that balance. There's strong guidance, especially emphasizing the spiritual side. But it respects individual choice, the free will principle.
So it's encouragement, not coercion, within the family.
Exactly. The emphasis is on the lasting value, the eternal impact of that spiritual upbringing. It shapes the whole family's foundation, really.
Okay. Now, moving on to that other question from the original letter, the one about the history of philosophers. Abdu'l Bahá makes a pretty direct statement here. He says, history before Alexander of Greece is extremely confused and wasn't reliably systematized. Why focus on Alexander's time as a cutoff?
Well, generally, historians agree that around the 4th century BCE, with Alexander, things started to change in terms of record keeping. Before that, a lot of history was based on oral traditions.
Things passed down by word of mouth.
Pretty much. And you can imagine over generations, stories change, details get lost or added. Systematic, written, verifiable history wasn't the norm back then.
The tablet even uses an example,
Oh,
right?
really? Yeah.
About 18th century facts being overturned later.
Yeah, it points out how even relatively recent history can be revised, which makes you think how much more uncertain things must be when you go back thousands of years.
So it's a caution against taking ancient historical details, especially timelines and specific events before Alexander, as completely solid fact.
Exactly. It's about understanding the limitations of those early accounts, even for famous figures, not dismissing them entirely, but being aware of the fuzziness.
Which leads to maybe a slightly surprising point for some listeners, that the Tablet of Wisdom, which is another Baha'i text, might have accounts that differ from some other historical narratives.
Right, and Abdu'l Bahá addresses this directly. He mentions the great diversity of opinion among historians in these contradictory accounts, especially between Eastern and Western traditions.
So different perspectives, different sources.
Yes. He clarifies that the Tablet of Wisdom drew on certain histories of the East. So it's reflecting a specific historical tradition, not necessarily claiming to be the only version or contradicting Western accounts just for the sake of it.
It underlines that history isn't always one single story, doesn't it? It can depend on who's telling it and what sources they had.
Absolutely. And to really drive this point home, the Rosenberg Tablet uses a powerful example.
The Torah.
Yes, the Torah. Pointing out that there are three main ancient versions: the Hebrew text, the Greek Septuagint, and the Samaritan version.
And they differ.
Significantly. The tablet says they differ greatly one from another, even with regard to the lifetimes of the celebrated figures.
Wow. Even on the lifespans in a sacred text.
Yeah. It gives specific numbers like the time between Noah's flood and Abraham's birth. The Hebrew text says 292 years, the Greek says 1072, and the Samaritan says 942.
That's a huge difference, almost 800 years between two versions.
It is. And similar massive discrepancies exist for the period from Adam to the flood. The tablet even mentions a source, Henry Westcott's commentary, where you can see tables comparing these differences.
So the point isn't to discredit the Torah, is it?
No, not at all. It's using what the tablet calls the most outstanding of all histories, scriptural history, to show that even there you find these kinds of contradictions in the historical details.
Okay, so it provides context. If even the most carefully preserved sacred histories have variations, then we should expect variations and uncertainties in less formal, ancient secular histories too.
Precisely. It sets the stage for understanding why Abdu'l Bahá then elevates Holy Writ.
Right. The next statement is key. Holy Writ is authoritative, and with it, no history of the world can compare. What's the reasoning behind that authority?
The tablet argues that the validity of the manifestation of God, the prophet or messenger, is established through multiple means: experience, investigation, studying records, evidence.
Like proving their divine station.
Exactly. And once that station is proven true, the Baha'i view is that whatsoever he may choose to say is right and correct. It stems from belief in the divine source of his knowledge.
So it's placing revealed truth from a manifestation on a different level than human compiled history.
A fundamentally different level, yes. Which brings us back to those pre-Alexander histories.
Based on oral accounts current among the people, compiled later, full of great discrepancies.
And the tablet reiterates they just can't be compared to or compete with Holy Writ in terms of authority or reliability.
It uses ancient Greece again as an example, right? How confused its history is, uncertainty about Homer.
Yes, even questioning if Homer existed or when he lived. It just reinforces the difficulty of relying too heavily on those very ancient, often orally transmitted accounts compared to divine scripture.
Okay. Then, towards the end, the tone shifts quite beautifully, I think. It becomes very personal, offering comfort.
It does. It directly addresses the recipient's affliction and distress.
And it does this by drawing a comparison to the suffering of the Blessed Beauty. Who is that referring to?
It typically refers either to Bahá'u'lláh, the founder of faith, or sometimes Abdu'l Bahá himself, giving the context of his own life. Both endured immense hardships and persecution.
So the idea is to put personal suffering into perspective.
Exactly. By remembering the magnitude of what the central figures of the faith went through for humanity's sake, one's own troubles can feel, well, different, manageable even.
The tablet says, reflecting on this can turn hardship into peaceful rest and merciful bliss.
It's quite transformative, the idea that even agony, a draught of agony, can become like a refreshing wine through faith and this broader perspective.
That's a really powerful message of spiritual alchemy almost, turning pain into something positive through spiritual understanding.
It is, and it connects back, doesn't it, to how individuals, fortified by that spiritual health we talked about earlier, can face difficulties and still contribute positively.
Transcend the personal hardship to focus on higher things, impacting society indirectly.
Precisely. It's about inner resilience leading to outward positive action, even in the face of suffering.
So, wrapping up our deep dive today on the Rosenberg Tablet, what are the main takeaways?
I'd say first, the absolute primacy of spiritual health over physical well-being. Second, the crucial role of spiritual education in raising children.
And third, a really nuanced perspective on history, understanding its limitations, especially ancient history, and recognizing the unique authority given to Holy Writ in the Baha'i faith.
Definitely. Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over.
Okay.
How does understanding these different levels of reliability, the potential confusion in historical accounts versus the certainty placed in spiritual guidance, how might that influence the way you navigate challenges and seek truth in your own life, or how we approach collective problems?
That's a great question to ponder. Where should people look if they want to explore these ideas further in the Baha'i writings?
Oh, there's so much. Other letters and talks by Abdu'l Bahá touch extensively on education, the soul's nature, history, dealing with tests. His writings are a vast resource. Specific compilations exist on many of these topics, too.
Wonderful. Plenty more to discover.
Always.
Well, thank you for joining us for this exploration of the Rosenberg Tablet. We hope you found it insightful. Until next time, on Baha'i On Air.